Hello everyone, it's HEDROVER. Last year a little album called Twin Fantasy kind of caught me off guard. I'd known about it for a little while, but it wasn't until a friend recommended it that I listened to it. I don't know, I kind of just thought maybe, it's lo-fi, maybe it won't be that good. It's just some random Bandcamp album. It's only talked about because the dude posted it everywhere. All that kind of stuff. But when you actually get down to the music, boy is it an affecting album. It's full of passion and personal struggle. It obviously doesn't sound the best, but it doesn't need to because every single other element of the album is so good that the low fidelity production is kind of excusable. Now me, I like me a bit of noise. I love noise rock, so I don't have that much of a problem with it being lo-fi. But a few months ago when the band announced that they would re-record the album in high fidelity, I mean, yeah, I'm interested. It's been 7 years, I want to see what kind of changes may happen. There were definitely some noticeable changes in the first few singles. So to give a brief rundown on Twin Fantasy, it's essentially the product of Will Toledo and where his mind was in 2011. It reflects a lot of autobiographical stuff having to do with relationships, breakups, sexuality, and at the time the name of Car Seat Headrest kind of just applied to him. It was mainly just him. He was just some dude in his bedroom making music on his laptop. And he got so much critical attention that a label picked him up. Now he's got a full-on band, access to studios. In 2016 the band released Teens of Denial, which is one of their best albums. It sounds considerably different to his older stuff, but it's still definitely him. I noticed a lot of vocal differences after coming out of the lo-fi era. So the first major thing the band decided to do after Teens of Denial was re-record Twin Fantasy. And I mean, Will stated before that Twin Fantasy is an unfinished album. He still doesn't view it as a finished product. But regardless of how he feels about it, a lot of people have come to love it. Twin Fantasy has already become a cult classic in lo-fi indie. So obviously, no matter how the new recording sounds, it's going to be met with scrutiny by the die-hard fans. So the main thing I'm attracted to in the original 2011 Twin Fantasy is just how much raw power and emotion there is in it. From the lyrics to the way the songs are structured and played out. 2 of the songs go over 10 minutes, one of them acting like a big introduction and the other acting like this big climactic finale. They're not the beginning and the end, but they're right next to the beginning and the end. The album is structured in a way where the beginning mirrors the end, and this is done with lyric repetition with Stop Smoking versus Keep Smoking. This is done with the song structures. The 2 long songs mirror each other, and the drumstick clicks you hear on the opening can be heard again in the last track. And despite the album being lo-fi, a lot of the instruments sound very good, especially the bass guitar. The bass guitar really stands out on this album for me. On songs like Nervous, Young and Humans and Famous Prophets, the bass guitar is like the best part. The album also really knows how to build up a moment. Famous Prophets is pretty much built around these builds. There's also quite a bit of vocal variety. The vocals adapt to whatever's going on in the music. There's specific moments where he's practically screaming, where he's almost at a whisper, and there's also several spoken word sections. I've never really been too big on those. I love the first half of Nervous, Young and Humans a lot, but I'm just not a fan of the spoken word at the end. There's a bit more in the last 2 tracks. They don't get too much in the way, but it just kind of takes me out of it. Because like I mentioned before, it's a very autobiographical album, but it deals with such universal concepts that anyone can appreciate. I feel like it just takes the universalness out of it and kind of just reminds you, this is my album. Me, Will. So 7 years later, here comes this new re-recording of Twin Fantasy. And yeah, it didn't need to happen, but it's cool that it exists. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I can simply appreciate it. Because while it's great hearing a lot of these songs in high fidelity, there's also a considerable amount of changes that were done to the individual songs. Some of them pretty good, but others not so much. I'll go through some of the good changes first. The drumming has to be number 1. Drumming's way better. Not to say Will was a bad drummer, but let's just say that wasn't his forte. It's just that the drumming in the re-recording is just way more energetic, way more flexible. The last third of Beach Life and Death highlight this. The drumming makes the ending of this 12-minute song, now 13-minute song, way more epic. I love the way the drumming gets more powerful when the Fish set of lyrics come in. And then there's other individual moments where the guitar work just sounds more twinkly and pretty, such as on the opener, My Boy, and certain areas of Cute Thing. And while I didn't mind the lo-fi aesthetic, there were certain areas of the original album that were kind of just painful, such as the last track and the organ it had. I was never too much a big fan of the title track because of the organ, but in high definition it sounds much better, and as a result I think the closer works much better. So now we're gonna start dipping into the negatives. The monologues. The spoken word sections. For some reason, he just made them longer. He changed them up And he made them longer. No, why would you want that? I now appreciate the monologue at the end of Nervous Young Inhumans, the original version, because at least it's not like 3 minutes. 3 minutes of just Will rambling about morality and stuff, like he's some sort of philosopher. The re-recording is significantly longer. Well, not super longer, but still, like over 10 minutes worth. Famous Prophets now being 16 minutes isn't really something that needed to happen, especially when the end is kind of just a very long outro of mishmash. Oh, here comes another spoken word section, not even read by Will. Have you ever heard the term less is more? Because that's kind of what I feel about the re-recording. This next negative doesn't really have much to do with the album itself, it's kind of just an effect of the new band. Will's vocal style, as I mentioned before, kind of changed upon the hi-fi era. A lot of Teens of Denial, he has this kind of slacker, I don't care kind of vocal style, and it works for that album, but he does the same thing on this album, and it does not work. I'm sorry, but you can't sing one of the most passionate albums out there, full of dread, full of heartbreak, like, I got so fucking romantic, I apologize. Like, buddy. To a certain extent, this re-recording is like taking the original album, Twin Fantasy, and applying a Teens of Denial filter over it. And they're two very different albums, so it's kinda hit and miss. Again, it's fun hearing what it sounds like, but it's just not as good as either one. There's also a few instrumentation changes. I don't think all of them are bad, but some of them just, I don't know. I've got no strong feelings about them either way, and it just makes me think, well, why would you change it if it didn't even do that much? The guitar that gives the main melody in Nervous Young Inhumans has been replaced by synths, and I'm a fan of the idea. I think it would work well as a more poppy song. They just don't sound that good. Here's the thing. Before the actual main chorus melody came in on the original, there was kind of just this build-up to with the bass guitar and stuff. But now, before the synths even come in, you can still kind of hear them kind of dwiddling in the background. So when they do actually come in, it just doesn't have the same impact. It's like the synths are there giving you this big spoiler alert. Like, spoiler alert, in a few seconds we're gonna come in. I mean, when the synths are there and they're in power, then they sound good, but it just seems like they sucked out a lot of the potential energy they could have had by dwiddling beforehand. I'm sorry for using the word dwiddling, but that's just what they sound like. The synths are just dorking around in the background. And another element that's been passed over from Teens of Denial is the big, quiet, loud dynamic. You hear it on the second third of Beach Life and Death, and now you hear it again here in Nervous Young Inhumans. It goes from this big, powerful wall of guitars or synths or whatever, and then it goes down to this very mellow, acoustic, a simple little drum line and Will speaking softly. But Will's vocals on this quieter section of the new Nervous Young Inhumans just don't match. They just come off as obnoxious. Like, the entire song goes quiet, and then he comes in going, "You should have seen my cursive back then." But don't get me wrong, I have a lot of these little nitpicks, but that's kind of all they are. A bunch of little individual nitpicks. The re-recording is still an overall pretty good album. I'd give it a 7. It's just that the original's a 9, so yeah. Why would I listen to a 7 out of 10 version of a 9 out of 10 album? But there are several things that the re-recording does better than the original. So I'll leave it at this. If you were to splice the albums together, made up of all the best aspects of each, it would go like this, at least for me. The original My Boy, the build-up's better. The first and third parts of the new Beach Life and Death, but the original middle. The original middle's just more emotive, and I'm not too big a fan of that quiet to loud dynamic on the new. The original Stop Smoking, the original Sober to Death. I think the ending on this song sounds way better in the original. There's kind of an otherworldly beauty about the original Sober to Death that kind of feels absent from the new one. Maybe that's just me. Compared to a lot of the other songs, they're pretty similar in quality. The old Nervous Young Inhumans for several reasons. Now, Bodies is a bit of a toss-up. I think I slightly prefer the new one. There's a significant change with a more electronic intro, and I don't think it's really better or worse. So at that point, I just prefer it because it's higher quality. It's one of the songs that works way better with modern car seat headrest. Cute Thing's also close, but I'm gonna have to go with the new one specifically because I like how twinkly it sounds. There's also the Frank Ocean name drop. It doesn't change my opinion all that much, but it's got more charm, I don't know. But again, that one's almost a tie as well. I was never a big fan of High to Death, so I don't really care about this one all that much. However, I do think of the monologues that he changed, added around, I kind of like the new one. The new High to Death ends with a kind of eerie phone call. I also think the original was so lo-fi, and the vocals were already reverby on the song, it got to the point where you couldn't even understand him on the original. So the understandability of the new one is something I prefer. Hands down, I prefer the old Famous Prophets. That build build before the release in the beginning after the whole shins part. In the new one, it's replaced kind of with just one drum. Dum! And then boom! And it's like, no, I liked the build in the old one. And then, of course, they added 6 unnecessary minutes to the new one. And like I mentioned before, I prefer the new version of the title track. The organ sounds better, and the only real big significant change to the song was a kinda new monologue. The very small spoken word section from the original is only partially changed. It still kinda leaves off on the same kind of note, and the last minute or so also sounds better in high definition. So it seems to me, for the most part, I prefer the first half of the original and the last half of the re-recording. I still prefer the original, but this track listing thing's kind of an interesting trend. I wouldn't say the last half was always the worst half, so I don't know. Maybe this is just how it turned out. And that's pretty much all I have to say on the matter. My name is Jezza. I'm slowly dying as we speak. You're slowly dying as you speak. We're all slowly dying. You'll come around again if you know what's good for you.
I have a Discord, it's pretty funny.